Hello, how's everyone doing? Thanks for tuning in. This is Chief with BostonCannabis.Info. It's one of our early live YouTube live broadcasts. So thank you for tuning in. We really just want to continue the conversation about cannabis and make sure that everybody gets to their say. There's a conversation right now going on about cannabis all over the state, but the mainstream debate leaves a lot of stuff out. So we're going to dig into all of this, and we're also going to challenge a lot of these ideas that are out there. My name's Chief, and I have been looking into these issues for a while. These issues being cannabis prohibition and the new cannabis markets that are developing, and how we should be looking at those markets. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to play a short piece of radio here from NPR. It was a short story they did a while back about equality in the cannabis industry and the fact that African Americans are being left out of the biz. So just bear with me with this, my technical obstacles here. Like I said, this is an early broadcast. We're going to attempt to make it as clear as possible. Here, I'm just going to replay an NPR broadcast about cannabis.
The legal marijuana industry is booming, and businesses are cashing in. Dispensaries alone raked in billions of dollars last year. But one group is being shut out of this industry, and it is African Americans. Amanda Chicago Lewis covers drug policy for BuzzFeed. She's written about this, and she's with us now. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Kelly.
Spell it out for us, if you could, just really clearly. What did you find in terms of the numbers on the disparity when it comes to who has entry to this industry and who doesn't?
So there are between 3,200 and 3,600 estimated dispensaries nationally. I talked to a lot of people and estimate that there are fewer than 3 dozen black dispensary owners in the country out of that 32 to 3,600, which is a little bit around 1%.
You have spent 6 months looking into this story. What made you start investigating it in the first place?
Well, it was very clear there were these laws in every single state that has legalized medical or recreational marijuana preventing people who had drug felonies from getting involved in the industry. And it seemed pretty blatant that that was a racist law.
Well, explain what you mean by that. You mean that people who have been committed for felonies, drug felonies in particular, are disproportionately people of color?
Yeah, I mean, we know that the war on drugs was enforced in a racially biased way. We know that that is not reflective of who's using and selling drugs. People of all races use and sell drugs at the exact same rates. I mean, data from the National Institute of Drug Abuse from every single year since they started measuring it shows that black teenagers are actually less likely to use drugs than people of any other race, but in every single county in America, black people have been between 2 and 10 times more likely to get arrested for selling or using drugs, since the 1970s. So it seemed pretty clear that the people who had drug felonies on their record disproportionately were black people. And also, I spend a lot of time at cannabis conferences, going to dispensaries, talking to people in the industry, and it just seemed very clear that these laws didn't really make sense.
Right, but lawmakers would say, right, that somebody who has committed a felony, a drug felony, isn't necessarily somebody you want to be the face of this business, right?
That's true, except for the fact that there are lots of people who grew and sold and used marijuana on the black market who were never arrested. So the idea behind the laws is to prevent diversion and to prevent the legal marijuana industry from becoming a front for criminal activity, which, is a real thing. There's an ongoing Supreme Court case where Nebraska and Oklahoma are actually suing Colorado over all of the legally grown marijuana that's being flowing through their borders.
Okay, so you're talking about this idea that drug dealers themselves tend to be people who have the kind of experience that's necessary to do this work, But if you are, somebody involved in drug activity and you're a person of color, you are much less likely to have access to this world. Is that a correct way of saying it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that lawmakers would like to keep drug dealers out, except for the fact that they need drug dealers or marijuana growers to help them get the industry going, which is why in a lot of different states you see things like no one with a drug felony can get involved in the industry, but if you're applying for a marijuana business license, it's a big plus if you have experience with cannabis. So how do you have that experience with cannabis if you weren't working with it on the black market? I also found people are shell-shocked because of the war on drugs. A lot of black people are very uncomfortable with the idea of getting involved in legal marijuana, both on a consumer side and on a business owner side. I also know several, black cannabis entrepreneurs whose family members are very horrified that they would take the kind of risk that they're taking.
Amanda Chicago Lewis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amanda Chicago Lewis covers drug policy for BuzzFeed.
All right, that was just a quick radio broadcast from PBS. A rare broadcast from them that really shed some light on the national industry and what the picture looks like throughout the country when you're talking about equity in the new cannabis industry. So it's one of the things I've been focusing on is equity in the cannabis industry and what it means. And that's why I started with that radio piece right there, just so people get an understanding of the layout. Basically, we had a drug war for many, many years, something called the drug war, where a lot of people made money and careers off of other people who they criminalized. Just look at all of the economic activity during the drug war and where all that money went. Prisons and all the law enforcement and all of the SWAT teams and all of the money spent during that time. All that economic activity. We're not really honest when we talk about who benefited from these policies and who didn't. And really, if you look at the chief beneficiaries of cannabis prohibition in America, well, we already know there's 5 chief lobbyists, right? Alcohol, tobacco, big pharma, and then, the rest can't come to my mind right now. Prisons is another one, and then law enforcement. That's right. Prisons, law enforcement, alcohol, tobacco, big pharma. Those are the 5 chief forces in America that have been keeping cannabis illegal. And so that should illustrate for folks who's benefiting from cannabis prohibition. Those 5 industries have been benefiting the most. That's why they spend money trying to keep cannabis illegal. Which 5 industries are we talking about? We already know them. Alcohol, because alcohol industry sees cannabis as a threat to them. So the alcohol industry is opposed. Tobacco, they see cannabis industry and consumers as a threat to them. So they spend money to keep cannabis illegal. Big Pharma, of course. Big Pharma is extremely guilty because they will lose money, right, too. They're afraid of cannabis in the industry because if it's legal, everyone will have cannabis products in their medicine cabinets, replacing tons and millions and billions of dollars from Big Pharma pushing other prescription drugs on us. Because we all know cannabis will help remove some prescription drugs from different people, whoever. A lot of people who take prescription drugs find that when they start using cannabis, consuming cannabis, using it as a medicine, they can actually get rid of some of these other pharmaceutical drugs that they've been taking. They no longer need them. The side effects for those pharmaceutical drugs is too high. There's too many side effects, and the cost outweighs the benefits when you measure it up to cannabis. And Big Pharma knows this. And the other thing that Big Pharma knows is they can't control cannabis as a medicine, right? Because we can all grow our own cannabis. We can all grow our own cannabis. And so how is Big Pharma supposed to make money? How are they supposed to make money if we're all growing our own medicine? And cannabis is so healing. It can help so many different symptoms and maladies. People use it for so much. We know that we'll start finding cannabis in everyone's medicine cabinet just because it's cheaper, it's safer, many less side effects, and it's very effective, right, for certain things. So the aspirins and the Tylenols and the ibuprofens and the what are all these other drugs? All these drugs they advertise on TV with all the numerous side effects. Many people will be able to replace a lot of these drugs through regular cannabis use, and Big Pharma knows this, and they don't own acres and acres of cannabis, as far as I know. I know they probably want to now, but they will. I'm sure they'll start growing cannabis for money and stuff. But if we have the ability to grow our own medicine, then we can make sure that the standards are extremely high, right? We don't have to listen to Monsanto's or any of these other people tell us what they're going to put in our cannabis and how they're going to grow it. We can control that ourselves if we just have the freedom to grow cannabis for ourselves and go to our own sources. So cannabis is extremely medicinal. That's why Big Pharma has a big problem with cannabis, and that's why they spend a lot of money. And look at all the money we're talking about: alcohol, tobacco, and Big Pharma. Just these three. Look at all the money, and this is how, people are shocked that people don't believe in global warming. Well, it's because of all the money that was spent by the petroleum companies and other stuff against the information. They put negative information out there against global warming, and they have convinced a large segment of the American population that global warming is a hoax, or it's not something to be concerned with, or that the science is no good. That's what they spend their money on. They spend their money on encouraging ignorance in the country so that they can continue to make money in their industry. That's what they do. That's just what it is. That's petroleum in that case, and other coal and other stuff when they're talking about global warming. All these industries do it, right? The firearm industry does it, right? And they have the right to lobby for their industry, but this is what's going on. We need to be aware. So alcohol, tobacco, and then Big Pharma. They're all afraid of cannabis, so they've been trying to keep it illegal, and by all means, doing all they can. And then, of course, we have law enforcement, which rounds out the other part of this team, this big maniacal team that's been keeping cannabis illegal in America by keeping people ignorant about the nature of cannabis. And so that's why I'm doing this, because I'm really tired of this ignorance and the lies. And so I'm here to spread some more information about cannabis. Now, I spend a lot of time on learning about cannabis, but I encourage everyone and anyone to please go out there, do your own research, and you can challenge anything I'm bringing forward. Just please do your research and spend the time on it, because I have. So if you don't believe what I'm saying, that's fine, but please just go and do your research. When you do, bring that to me that you don't believe what I'm saying. If you can prove it with some research, I will be happy to listen. But generally, most people don't know much about cannabis. Most of what they know our lives that have come through reefer madness and all of this propaganda that comes from all of these industries and, of course, the government, right? The government has a large interest in, federal government has a large interest in not making cannabis legal, right? They've been making a lot of money and circulating a lot of money in the drug war. That's where they're invested. They're not really invested in, wisdom, knowledge, knowing about cannabis and having fair policy. That's not really interesting to them. They have industries that they're protecting, and that's just that. That's as far as they go. So when we're listening and we're learning about cannabis, we need to, when you can't take information from these sources. These are not credible sources of information when you're talking about alcohol industry, tobacco industry, big pharma industry, and government. Government has lost all credibility when it comes to speaking about cannabis. And it's kind of ridiculous when we see how they continue to act as if they do have some credibility there, but it's scheduled incorrectly, and it's been scheduled incorrectly ever since the Controlled Substances Act was first made and put into action by President Tricky Dick Nixon. It's amazing how these things just come full circle, right? These politicians like Nixon and the trouble he had in the White House, and we have very similar type of things going on now. It's very interesting. And that's why, like I said, it's up to us to speak out when you see absolutely ignorant stuff or people that are not aware of what they're doing. We shouldn't keep our knowledge to ourselves. We should go out and share it with folks. So here I am, right? So here I am. And I appreciate folks sticking with me as we continue to explore all this stuff. We were talking alcohol, tobacco, and then big pharma. They've been spending tons of money to keep cannabis illegal. And then, of course, there's the government and law enforcement. And then the other big beast in the room is prisons, right? Prisons have been investing heavily in keeping cannabis illegal, folks. I mean, you need to think about that. Prisons have been spending money. Prisons have been spending money lobbying our government to keep cannabis illegal. Just think about that. That's amazing, right? They want to spread ignorance, encourage that ignorance, lie to people about the nature of cannabis, and then after they've lied to them, they want to criminalize them with the same thing so they can make money off of them in some type of new slavery system. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. What an age. What an age. Anyway, alcohol, tobacco, and big pharma. And then, of course, law enforcement, prisons, and the government. Just think about all of that money that has circulated between law enforcement and prisons and the government related to cannabis prohibition in just, let's take the last 20 years, 30 years, just imagine. That's all investment. They're all invested in that system, a system that encourages people not knowing the truth about cannabis and people criminalizing people with that ignorant knowledge. And anyone who looks at cannabis prohibition history will quickly come to the realization that it was a big mistake and should have never been passed in the first place. I challenge folks to look into the history of cannabis prohibition. Please, please. And I already know what you're going to find. And if you don't know it, you may be shocked to find it was never scientific. It was never a real concern about public safety. The big force, the big reason that cannabis was made illegal was simply to criminalize black people and other undesirable types in society. And I challenge you to go ahead and bring another answer to me. Please, tried to say that cannabis prohibition was not absolutely racist from the beginning. And I really I dare you to go ahead and try to say that's not true. And we all know this. So this makes this issue so much more serious because the history is very clear and open. It's very clearly a racist system that feeds into what we now have mainstream language and understanding of mass incarceration, thanks to Michelle Alexander's book and even this Ava DuVernay's documentary and so many other pieces of fantastic media and literature and so on. We now understand mass incarceration's really just the new slavery system. We now understand that, right? So what do we do about all of this injustice and immorality? Do we just continue the system because, hey, you know, people have 401ks and nice jobs and whatever, or do we do the right thing? I argue we do the right thing. I argue if we had an opportunity to exclude racism from the conversation, well, that's what we should do. If we have an opportunity to decrease racism in these systems, in these institutions, then that's what we should be aiming for. And we have an opportunity here, especially with this law that was crafted here in Massachusetts. It's one of the few cannabis legalization efforts that actually includes language that recognizes the historic injustice that's been done to so many people through cannabis prohibition. The Massachusetts law actually has a piece in there that says, I believe it's worded harmed communities, people from communities that have been harmed from cannabis prohibition are basically supposed to be supported in getting into this new industry. And that's what the law here in Massachusetts says, the cannabis legalization law that recently passed. Now, our politicians are rapidly trying to change this and rapidly trying to make this make it not work, I guess. And so I've been watching this and I've been getting very frustrated. So that's why I'm sharing it with you folks, that they don't, we already know there's not a legal, a retail market here, right? And there's very few medicinal dispensaries here, right? And we understand that that's by design. That's not a mistake. That's by design, right? That's just how they've been building the market. I argue that if they're honest about building a new legal market, if they're really honest about building a new legal market and conquering the social justice piece by recognizing that the drug war was racist and that people have suffered and that people deserve to be acknowledged, and going forward, right, we don't want to make these mistakes again. So the new policies have to acknowledge what happened. And what happened was tremendous racism and the denial of people's rights, people being thrown into jail and criminalized. Let's remember how violent the drug war was. It was violent. Why do you think it's violent? I mean, it's violent because it was just ratcheted up. More money, more weapons, more money, more weapons. And so the drugs get more expensive and it just becomes a huge industry. We built that. We built the black market. We built it when we decided on a prohibitive distribution model for cannabis. Let's go back for a moment. All of us voters that were, that were in states where, let's talk about Massachusetts. Before cannabis was legal for adult consumption, we had the medicinal cannabis paradigm and scheme for a few years, right? This is just recently. And before that, we had a prohibitive cannabis distribution stream, a distribution model. And what is the prohibitive cannabis distribution model? What am I talking about? Well, when you outlaw something that there's still a market for, how does that market behave? Well, it's outlawed. So that market is going to behave in certain ways. We know this. The products are going to become more expensive, right? There'll be less opportunity to have protections for the consumer, and there'll be less options for the consumer. We know this, right? We know these things. This is not hard. So in that model, when we said we know people will be getting cannabis, but we want it to be illegal. When you create that model, you have to accept the other things that come with it, right? Or else you're not being responsible. So now we moved into a medicinal cannabis model, which, what did that one do? That changed it from, that kind of changed cannabis legally and said if it's medicinal, it added a bunch. Basically, medicinal cannabis adds a bunch of regulations so that the people that handle cannabis are few. Consumers still have very few options. All the control of the industry is managed by a few connected rich people, and the masses have, once again, high prices and few options. Okay, that's basically a heavily regulated market, right? That's medicinal cannabis. And so that's why consumers have not really been satisfied. It's heavily regulated distribution model. That's what medicinal cannabis is. And that's why people are unsatisfied. Cannabis should be compared to other things that people use regularly. Yeah, you should compare it to other things that people use regularly, and noticing how many people actually consume cannabis on a regular basis. You need to think about these things in different terms than our mayor might think about them with just having one medicinal dispensary in the city limits, in the city of Boston. That's not going to serve the city of Boston. That's just a token dispensary to say, hey, I'm solving it. But one dispensary is not good enough for a whole city. That's absolutely ridiculous. You have to build a market, an actual market, to meet the demands of the people in that market and in that region. You're building a market, whether you like it or not, because the demand is there. So when we prohibited it, we built a black market. And when we said we're going to have medicinal cannabis, then we built a heavily regulated market where you had to have almost $1 million to own a dispensary, and you have to open yourselves up to all kinds of law enforcement checks and security and fines and fees and checks. Heavily regulated market. And what the large black market that was already created, how did that market react when they put all of these regulations on there? The black market stayed strong, right? The black market stayed strong. And all of these regulations, yes, they created a new industry, but it's not serving all the people that they said it would serve. And so that's why it doesn't do it, because it's too regulated. In the medicinal thing, you have to pay $200 or plus to see a doctor once a year, and you have to pay another $50 or more for the registration through the state every year. And so this is heavily regulated and expensive. Sorry about that. Heavily regulated and expensive. And that's why it doesn't serve. So now we've legalized recreational, or what they call recreational, and what I'd like to refer to as adult use. Because it's not a party when people use cannabis. People can still use cannabis medicinally if they didn't buy it out of a medicinal dispensary. You're still using it medicinally. it's still medicinal cannabis to you. And these are kind of some of the ways they trick people into believing in their very narrow rules and paradigms. But medicinal cannabis does not have to just come out of a dispensary, folks. Medicinal cannabis is cannabis that is used medicinally, if you can process that a little bit. Medicinal cannabis is not just cannabis that comes out of a medical dispensary. It's not. They'll try to trick you and say all kinds of, this is medicinal cannabis. This is medicinal cannabis is simply cannabis that is used in a medicinal way. Okay, that's it. It's not much more complicated than that. But anyway. We're moving to an open market. Now, so we're building an open market. Building an open market is what we're doing. And so how do you build an open market? Do you do it by adding more and more regulation? Do you do it by encouraging people to have to interact with our racist institutions more and more while you're not really acknowledging that our institutions are racist? Well, that's going to be a problem because the black market is large. The black market is large. If you just want to make a small market that's heavily regulated, and extremely expensive, I'm sure you'll be able to do that, but it won't include the masses of people that rely on cannabis regularly. That's a joke. You really need an open market to make legal cannabis work, at least in the beginning, before you start bringing all the institutional crap. You have to build the market first. Otherwise, it will stay underground. It'll stay in the black market. Look at it like this. Government has done absolutely nothing to support cannabis consumers, right? Until consumers forced medicinal cannabis on government. And now, so that was inadequate, right? So now they're forcing what they call recreational cannabis on government. And so our government is responding with regulation. And so, this is a sensitive time when you're building a new market, especially when this is just a very sensitive time. And the people that put together the cannabis law for Massachusetts looked at all the pieces and understood much better than any of these politicians who are new to cannabis do, that one piece affects the other. They weren't ignoring racism when they built this law. Modern politicians ignore racism when they're adding regulations. This law took racism into account. So, we have to be honest about what we are building here in the state of Massachusetts. I just want people to be completely honest, because there seems to be a large push to imitate and to copy a lot of the legal regulations that exist in Colorado, right? We've had Massachusetts politicians visiting the state of Colorado just at a very confusing pace. It seems like every time you turn around, we have a boatload, a plane load of politicians visiting Colorado. It's comical. It's very funny to watch them go and act all brand new in a dispensary or the greenhouses and stuff, and as they're being introduced to their culture, of course they react. Oh wow, this is too much. Well, this is your first experience in the culture. And you go all the way to Colorado and start mixing it up with all those folks. I just don't think I don't think that was the best way to go about things. I think if you wanted to learn about cannabis, you could have really just sat down right here in Massachusetts and talked to a lot of the folks here who have been working on these issues for a long time and have thought about these things for a long time and actually worked out a lot of this stuff. So I know many politicians are getting into this issue now and trying to figure out what they need to do. Well, I encourage you folks to listen to the folks that have been doing this work and thinking about this much longer than you have. I really encourage folks to do that, because it would really be a tragedy to build another racist cannabis distribution model here in Massachusetts. It would really be another tragedy, and it's totally preventable. It's totally preventable. And what am I talking about? Oh, they're just going to recriminalize? Well, this is what I'm talking about. And it's very clear to see. You saw police, along with reporters, campaigning, trying to paint cannabis as some type of threat on our roads, as some type of new threat on our roads, when we all know cannabis is absolutely not some new type of threat on our roads. The cannabis consumer population has been driving cars for a long time. You know, these people are new to the issues, so they overreact and act like there's a large public safety concern where there's actually a much more reasonable, much smaller public safety concern. Much smaller public safety concern. And we need to remember what phase we're at, what stage we're at right here. All these politicians want taxes. This recreational cannabis law that's come has promised taxes, you know. And so it's basically the Tax Marijuana Act, right? And actually, and if you know your history, the first law against cannabis in the United States of America, the first time it was made illegal, was with the Marijuana Tax Act, 1937, I believe. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. That's how they made it illegal. They said, we're going to tax it. This seems to be lost on a lot of folks. The way they first made cannabis illegal in America was by taxing it, folks. Was by taxing it. So when I raise the alarm that, you know, that they're just going to create some other type of bad system, please look into the history. Cannabis prohibition started with a tax. That's what essentially made it illegal. And that's what kept cannabis illegal all the way until 1969, when it was found unconstitutional to apply that tax. They had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. So that little reg, or that law they made back, that racist one, 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, it took a long time to get it off the books. It was never constitutional, and it was always racist. I encourage you to look into it, but anyway. So cannabis prohibition started with the effort to tax it. And what happened, you know, back then they couldn't get tax stamps. They just refused to issue tax stamps. But now they could make taxes so high that they encourage a black market, right? And at the same time, we have law enforcement who feel like they've lost a revenue stream from locking people up for cannabis, and they've lost another tool to criminalize people by not being able to criminalize people for cannabis. So they're still looking. How can we be involved? How can we continue to do what we used to do? What do we have left here on cannabis is what law enforcement is saying. And so they say, well, the streets, the roads, we need to make sure the roads are safe. And that is their job. They need to make sure these roads are safe. But the argument they use, against cannabis on the roads is ridiculous. Because first of all, they were encouraging the black market. They didn't want to know before. Now that they know people are using cannabis, now they're concerned. It doesn't make much sense. But Okay. And so they say cannabis, it's distracting for the driver, and you're a worse driver when you use cannabis and then you get into the car. And this may be true for some people. It may not be true for other people. But what we do know is true is that there are a lot of things, right, that can make you a bad driver. And a lot of them are much worse than cannabis. But we don't see them as important enough to make to send the cops out to stop that, right? We don't do that. Even cell phone, I would argue, is not even. I don't see people get pulled over for cell phone. I don't know. Perhaps they do. Maybe that's the law enforcement piece. But anyway, they're no longer able to put people in jail for cannabis. But what can they do? They can put them in jail, and they can criminalize them if they are found to be under the influence of cannabis. Hey. And so the streets are a new place for them to try some new criminalizing techniques and some new technology. They're trying to find some new tests. They're looking all over the country, all over the world, to find new tests, to find how can we criminalize these cannabis consumers on the road. What's going to allow us to, have the upper hand as far as law enforcement? And you can see this play out, folks. Just go and look at the news. But it was very interesting. Really, what I think if they're really concerned about how people are driving, right? If they're really concerned, then they need to do a test that's not based on how much cannabis is in your system or how much pizza's in your belly or how much whatever. What they should do is like an abilities test to see if you're able to drive, like with the normal functions and stuff, instead of just trying to criminalize you for some small cultural thing like cannabis use, right? Many people do many things that could affect the way that they drive, and they do, right? But we don't say, hey, you didn't take your prescription medication, so you're criminal. Or we don't say, hey, you took your prescription medication and crashed. This prescription medication thing is an epidemic. We need to set up roadblocks, check people for their prescription medications, and make sure that they're not taking these medications when they're driving, right? Because, we know that sleep and prescription medications are more, and absolutely alcohol, of course, are more dangerous on the roads than cannabis. Much more dangerous. So some of these arguments, we understand where they come from, but they're overblown. And so all of this stuff, when you add it all up, right, and then the other things they want to fight about the number of plants, and they want to argue about the amount that is allowed for someone to possess. Now, see, for them to keep harping on these issues, it just means that they're itching to enforce these issues. Really, you're looking to enforce whether I have 10 or 13 plants or 14 plants at my house? Is that really what our law enforcement should be spending their money doing? No one's going to say that. So why are they even concerned with how many plants are 6, 8? Well, because I said there's a lot of fear. A lot of this fear comes from prohibition, okay, and the forces that want to keep cannabis illegal. And that's just the truth. Let's go back over our 5 main culprits, right? Alcohol, tobacco, big pharmaceutical companies, law enforcement, and prisons. These are the 5 main lobbying groups that have been keeping cannabis illegal. Just like when you have the global warming debate dominated by petroleum and petroleum-based companies trying to muddy the waters of information, making people not believe in global warming or think it's a hoax and so on. They have been spending money trying to convince people to not believe in global warming. Just like our government and these five interests have been spending money to keep people ignorant of cannabis and make people have a negative attitude and continue the negative stigma towards cannabis. That's what's going on, folks. And it's relentless, the messages we get in America today, yes, but we do need to pay attention. Else we'll all just find ourselves taking prescription pills in jail while we drink alcohol, and it's just too much. Anyway, please look into these issues too. I challenge anyone. Please look into them. I challenge anyone. If you think I might be wrong on something here. So in the city of Boston, we're going to talk city of Boston real quick. I do want to say the city of Boston has already had some hearings. That were open to the public about basically what they thought about the new cannabis industry, and they were taking suggestions. That committee put out a report in December, and I suggest people go and take a look at it. It's called Recommendations for Ensuring Racial Equity in Marijuana Licensing, from the Boston City Council Committee on Jobs, Wages, and Workforce Development. I was part of this, and this was actually some fantastic work. They were organized and they were open. They heard from a large number of people in the city, and as I reviewed the report that was put out, they tried to include most of what was said at those hearings. So I encourage people to go seek out that report. We're going to post it on BostonCannabis.Info soon, but you can find it yourself as well. It's from the Boston City Council Committee on Jobs, Wages, and Workforce Development. It's recommendations for ensuring racial equity in marijuana licensing. And so they listened to the community folks. They had several hearings where they listened to some panels and individuals coming forward. I was one of them. Many others were. And we all raised our concerns with the city of Boston about cannabis licensing. Unfortunately, before that happened, we had one city councilor several city councilors, I guess, who had been bombarded from their constituency about their fears about cannabis and the new cannabis consuming culture and cannabis consumers themselves. People were expressing that they were concerned and in fear of their businesses and of their families, right? So they complained to their city councilors, and their city councilors reacted as fast as they could. And what did they do? They said, my goodness, cannabis is coming to the city of Boston. And actually, you can look this up, folks. You can go to the City of Boston website, go to the City Council's video library, right? The Boston City Council's video library. And when you go there, just enter marijuana as a search term into the box there, into the search box. Marijuana. And you should see all of the hearings regarding marijuana or cannabis. I think you're going to have to say marijuana and not cannabis in there, but that's how the government refers to it. So you'll enter marijuana as a search term and all those videos will come up. Scan through those. And you know what? What's even more interesting? Scan through the earliest ones. Some of the earliest videos and see what our politicians, and I'm talking about city councilors this time, see how our city councilors were reacting to cannabis before it was cool. Go back a little bit and see, because there's a couple times where new medicinal dispensaries came in front of the city council. And this was clearly something that was new to them. You can see on the video. And there was some little side comments and stuff about cannabis consumers and about medicinal cannabis and some, the fact that some counselors may not have respected the idea of medicinal cannabis. You can look it up for yourself. It's on video. And there's very few hearings that the city of Boston has had. I think there'll be about 7 videos that pop up, maybe 8. I don't know. But anyways, I have the on my screen right here. Let's see if we can get you closer into my screen. Oh yeah, what's that, baby? Oh yeah, that's right. And so what we have here is, this is the order where Councilor Flaherty, what they did, due to the concerns of the people that the citizens that came to them, before cannabis was legal, before we even had the vote, they came in and applied a text amendment to change basically some wording and treat marijuana and cannabis totally different than any other industry in the city of Boston. Let me see. Ordered, Boston City Council through Councilor Flaherty submits a petition to amend the text of Boston zoning code to limit the siting of any marijuana dispensary, whether medical or recreational, no closer than 2,500 feet. 2,500 feet from any other existing dispensary. That's about a half mile. So what they're saying is, hey, before they bring legalized cannabis, we're going to nip this in the bud. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we can't have that much of this industry here. So how can we cut this right now? And how could they cut it? They said every single cannabis establishment basically has to be a half mile away from every other cannabis establishment. Now this was fine to the folks who have absolutely no idea about the cannabis consuming community, right? Oh, that's fine. They only need one every half mile. Well, that's great. I mean, can we do this same thing with laundry, with dry cleaning services, which have all these harmful chemicals in there? Can we say every dry cleaning place needs to be a half mile away from every other dry cleaning place? Why is this? Well, this is because I've had citizens come to me and tell me they're afraid of the dry cleaners and they don't like the chemicals and they make a smell and they don't want these type of places to start building up in their community, So dry cleaners should actually be a half mile apart from each other, just to give residents and other business owners, some relief and a break from the onslaught of this, industry, dry cleaning, or plug in whatever else you want. Chinese food stores, gas stations, Dunkin' Donuts, right? Barber shops, hair salons, bodegas, right? None of these businesses should be within a half mile of each other. Why? Well, because I don't approve, and I have some people who have not approved, and they've come to me and made complaints. Now, explain how that makes sense. Maybe you can. Anyways, that's basically what happened, okay? And so, before we had a legal market here in Massachusetts or in Boston, we're talking about Boston, before we even had the legal market here, our city councilors went in, approved this text amendment, which made it so that all cannabis establishments have to be a half mile apart, basically, from each other. That's how they do things. This is a totally unprecedented step to take against an industry, and I challenge folks to find something similar. And I challenge folks to find really a legitimate reason to let's look at it. Let's look at it. It says, whereas, Councilor Flaherty is saying, whereas the siting of marijuana dispensaries, whether medical or recreational, at a future time, should be evenly distributed within Suffolk County and not have any one community or neighborhood host a cluster of multiple dispensaries. Now therefore be it, right? So what they're saying is, hey, what he's saying is we want to evenly distribute cannabis establishments and not have any two cannabis establishments close to each other. That's just too much for our business community to handle. That's just too much for our families to handle. We have to make sure that cannabis establishments are not close to each other, right? Never mind about liquor stores being able to be right next to each other. Forget about that. And never mind about pharmacies being able to be located right next to each other. Forget about that. And never mind about donut shops being right next to each other. And never mind about barber shops and hair salons and dry cleaners or any other business in the city of Boston. Just don't think about that. When it comes to cannabis, these places are very different, and so we have to make sure that they're far apart from each other, right? So this is what they brought to the conversation. This is what they brought, and they just did this, folks. They just did it, and actually, they broke their own rules to do this. Look it up. They broke their own rules to do this because they didn't notify people in time to affect it, whatever. This is the regs that they work with. I'm not really familiar, but basically it's clear that something was inappropriate about how they did this thing, okay? So now they kind of succeeded there. Boom, okay, we've effectively been able to cut the number of cannabis establishments that would become available in the city of Boston. Boom, before the market is even able to open up. Boom, they got it. Boom, they got that one, right? Okay, that's fine. Now what else are we seeing, folks? We're seeing every, right, small little suburb surrounding Boston. What are they saying? We don't want cannabis. We don't want cannabis establishments in our suburb, in our town. And what are the politicians going to do? They're saying we don't want these places. So we're going to have to listen to them and make sure these places don't come. You see what's going on here, folks? So it's not going to be evenly spread out. You get it? It's not going to be evenly spread out. It will be sparse. It'll be sparse, and you'll have to travel to go get something you want. But all these regs are really just designed to slow the development of the legal industry. Oh, let me hold this thing. That thing's great. Let's go to this. Yeah. Hold on a minute there. Yup. Yeah. All right. I was holding the mic, which was doubling as the camera, which was absolutely ridiculous. But I get into this stuff, and it is technical. But we have to understand what's happening here, okay? We are tasked with building a new, legal, inclusive market from a black market. That is the task, folks. Some people are in there just to, make sure they get the most return for their people or their group or their city or their state, But what we are truly tasked with is building a new, legal, effective, inclusive market that serves all the people of the Commonwealth and doesn't abuse anyone. That's really what it is. And we should not get confused or sidetracked chasing taxes so much that we break the system, or not recognizing racism so much that we repeat mistakes, right? It said, whether medical or recreational at a future time should be evenly distributed within Suffolk County. Well, shouldn't other businesses be evenly distributed so that all business can really, we can all benefit? This is not really going to help the market at all. Not this text amendment that was just premature and separated. I just don't understand it, because when you walk around Boston, that you don't see even distribution of establishments. That's just a joke. But anyway, is there even distribution of gas stations in Boston? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's sparse. You'll be looking for a gas station, right? Anyway, so that's the city council. But they're all, it's new to them. I think Ayanna Presley was really took the lead of the committee that they did on equity, and like I said, I was very impressed with that. I think Tito Jackson was one of the early councilors to come out in favor of the legalization vote, even though it was late. Just like so many of these politicians are late to get up to date with this issue, but Tito Jackson was one of the early ones. We all know Mayor Marty Walsh, and Governor Charlie Baker are essentially prohibitionists on this issue. And then I guess all these other Massachusetts politicians will fall somewhere along there. What's interesting is Congressman Michael Capuano did receive an A+ from Normal, which is impressive. Congressman Capuano, if it's interesting to you. But so we're building a new open market, and I hope people can talk about this with their friends and everything else, because it's not just cannabis is legal now. We have work to do. We're building something that's never been built before, and everyone has their interests, but we need to keep our eyes on the collective goal, right? Otherwise, it will all fall apart, and we'll just be building another piece of garbage. So it's coming up to 2 o'clock. That's great. Thank you for the folks who have been with us, listening to me just go on and on. I encourage folks to dig into the city council, and then dig into this new joint committee on marijuana up at the State House. I was actually there on Monday. They were having this joint committee to discuss all these new bills that have been proposed regarding cannabis by all these politicians. And like I said, we have a lot of small towns that want to be able to say no to any cannabis establishment. They don't even want to include them. And so the law that was passed specifically forbid them from doing that. And that's the law that was passed by all the voters. So, they really just want to ruin the law and turn it into something for themselves. And they really have a problem accepting a lot of the stuff that we all know about cannabis prohibition. And I'm really afraid some of these politicians have not even really been exposed to anything true about cannabis. That's one of my big concerns. Because if you're not a cannabis consumer, you don't know very much about cannabis. Because you know what you've learned from TV, movies, propaganda, reefer madness, the government, DARE programs, law enforcement. You know what they've told you, but you don't know about cannabis. You know what They think they know. You know, if you're not a consumer and you got your information from other people who are not consumers, right? They got their information from other people who are not consumers. And I'm talking about consumers of not just cannabis, consumers of history, books, stuff like that too. It's very simple to know the history of cannabis and how it's an immoral law. I think some of this dishonesty, I think some of these people know what they're doing. Some of these people know because it's just too clear. Part of this clash between cultures that we're seeing, and it can you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it like this. America is an alcohol culture, right? America is an alcohol culture. Cannabis represents a much different type of culture. And if you go back through history, some people can break up all cultures through history into one of these two groups, cannabis culture or alcohol culture. Some historians can actually say this. And you have societies, cultures, religions that included cannabis and made it and elevated it. And then you have the same other communities, societies, cultures that elevated alcohol in a similar way. And when these cultures come together, of course, they fight. And there's a lot of conflict because their cultures are built on two totally different things, right? Alcohol brings a whole bunch of stuff to the table. Cannabis brings a totally different thing to the table. And that's why you'll see these culture clash when we've already adopted the culture of alcohol. And so this is why I talk about the city of Boston, because it's so unseemly for the city of Boston to be constantly going after new alcohol licenses for new alcohol establishments. New alcohol establishments, all this construction you see, all these big buildings come with a restaurant that serves liquor, folks. All these mixed use buildings they're building, mixed use. There's commercial space on the bottom and people are living on the top, and it's 10% low income, and it's, all of that stuff. There's usually a restaurant that serves alcohol in each one of these buildings, or in many of them, or as part of the development package that was offered that was taken by these developers. They usually include an alcohol establishment, and these developers will tell the city and anyone else, hey, we can't build this if you don't put a bar in there. We have a restaurant that wants to open up there, but they needed a liquor license. And so you're going to have to help us get a liquor license so we can build this stuff. And the city is so happy to work on their behalf to get these alcohol licenses and open up all of these alcohol establishments to encourage what? Economic activity. That's great. That's what they should be doing. They should be encouraging economic activity, trying to help business in the city of Boston, trying to get businesses the licenses they need, right? And so the conflict has been, there wasn't enough alcohol establishment license in Boston, so they all became, all of our city councilors and our politicians became advocates for alcohol establishment licenses. More and more, as many as we can get. Look it up. You'll see the fight. It went on for a long time. They're always trying to get more alcohol establishment licenses. Always. When it comes to a cannabis establishment license, look at the order. Think about the text amendment I just read to you and how prematurely they cut the legs off from this industry coming here. They're not interested in chasing licenses for cannabis at all, right? Screw the cannabis industry. We need alcohol. And so just watch the way the city council treats cannabis licensing and alcohol licensing. And all the while, remember, alcohol has a tremendous cost to all of us. It makes our roads dangerous. People crash. People get drunk. We have to pay for police. People have to get locked up. People fight. There's domestic abuse off of alcohol, over and on and on and on. Right? Alcohol costs us pain, blood, money, all of that. But everyone accepts it. Everyone accepts it. It's part of our life. We're an alcohol culture. We accept death related to alcohol. We accept that. Cannabis, despite the fact you can't really kill someone with cannabis, they're terribly afraid of. They'd rather have an alcohol establishment over a cannabis establishment, obviously, and so you're left scratching your head, wondering, what are they after? Real public safety, and at the same time they're complaining that cannabis is not safe. They come with these public safety concerns with cannabis, when in reality, they're constantly looking for more and more alcohol establishment licenses, which goes against any of the public safety concerns that they're complaining about. And so help me make sense of this if you can. Please, help me make sense of it. But if you look at the way the city of Boston is constantly trying to increase the number of alcohol establishments throughout the city, and then if you look at the way they've already made the decision to decrease the possible number of cannabis establishments, it's totally ridiculous. But it does illustrate what I'm telling you about these cannabis cultures versus alcohol culture. You see, it's just cultural thing. These are cultural differences, folks. And America's a big melting pot. America is Rome, right? And we're just all a mix of cultures trying to figure it out. Well, what's happening right now is the dominant culture is losing some arguments. The dominant culture is losing some arguments, and they are losing this cannabis argument because, all cultures have lies. All cultures have lies that, that are part of the culture. And if that lie is challenged, it disrupts the culture. Our alcohol culture here in America was lying about cannabis. They were lying. That's it. And if you look at history, you'll see what I'm saying. It's very interesting to trace the history of cannabis, because when you do, it's extremely interesting, because when you do, you find cannabis is in the Bible, first of all, which was a special experience for me, because I was like, wait a minute. That was revolutionary for me. That really led me to a lot of other hidden truths, really exposed a lot of lies for me when I found out that cannabis has been sitting right there in the Bible the whole time. It's actually part of the anointing oil. Anointing oil told to Moses by the burning bush in Exodus 30:23. Cannabism is the term, Kanehbosem or Bosm. Cannabism is the ancient Hebrew term for cannabis. And when they were translating the Hebrew parts of that Bible into Greek, they mistranslated this ancient Hebrew word for cannabis into many different things through the ages, but it was first mistranslated once from ancient Hebrew into Greek. Since then, you'll know if you look at Exodus 30:23, you'll see them referring to something called sweet calamus. You'll see that, depending on the Bible version you have, you'll have them, it may say sweet cane, it may say aromatic reed, it may say fragrant reed, it may say all different types of things. Folks, it's cannabis. It's cannabis. Cannabis is in the holy anointing oil. And I know we probably don't, I dug into Christian history and the way they used this holy anointing oil, and it was a very strong recipe. They give the recipe for the anointing oil in the Bible, right? It's fascinating. God speaks to Moses through a burning bush and gives him the recipe for cannabis oil. I am not lying to you. Look it up. And he says, when you want to talk to me, I believe he said, you pour this oil all over your body, drench yourself in this oil. And that's how they did revelation, right? And cannabis was also part of the incense. And they say as much right there too. And if you're familiar with the tent of meeting, Moses and others go into the tent of meeting to speak to God. The tent of meeting always has a cloud of smoke above it at the door. This is where they burn incense in the tent of meeting. They go in there alone. They breathe this, they inhale this like the Scythians did, and they come out, and then they dictate revelation. Oh, this is what's going on. I spoke to God, and this is what's... It's actually quite beautiful. But, why does it take so much pain to just be honest with us about what's going on there? There's cannabis in the anointing oil. Fine. Well, why lie about it? Anyway, there's also cannabis in the incense. Now so much makes sense when you know that Jesus was the anointed one and he healed with oil, right? That makes sense. And so if you look at a lot of this stuff with a new eye, understanding terms for what they really are, then you get a deeper understanding of the Christian religion and the Bible. A deeper understanding that very few of these Christians actually seem to be aware of. So, once again, cannabis is in the Bible. It's called cannabism. It's Exodus 30:23, given to Moses through the burning bush. Recipe for anointing oil, and I believe that may be the passage where they talk about incense, but it's clear that cannabis is part of the incense as well. And there's cannabis actually throughout the Bible. There's cannabis use, and sometimes it's favored by the God in the Bible, and other times it's not favored by the God in the Bible. And these are cultural things, like I said, cultural. So I encourage folks to look that up and find out how cannabis has always had a lot to offer spiritually. And I'm under the belief that cannabis actually encourages collective enlightenment. So that's another reason why I support legalized cannabis. I believe cannabis use supports enlightenment, and we know how cannabis affects people in groups, just like we know how alcohol affects people in groups, right? And so we know that cannabis brings people together. We know it makes people more peaceful and social. We know that. So why would they want to fight against this? And why would they not want us to have this knowledge? Why would they not want us to have this peace? Why would they not want us to collectively become more enlightened and know more about our situation? Why? And that's why you'll continue to see cannabis get legalized, because when people learn, they become advocates, they realize they've been lied to, and they get pissed off. So as people learn, and as people know more, cannabis will continue to become more legal, is what I believe. Now, there are still all of these very powerful forces out there who are trying to do just exactly the opposite, keep cannabis illegal and keep knowledge of cannabis down, keep people ignorant of cannabis and also ignorant of themselves, right? Ignorant of history, ignorant of possible medical treatment that could help them or relieve their pain. That's what those forces have been spending money on, to stop people from getting that help. Alcohol, tobacco, big pharmaceuticals, law enforcement, and the prison system. Yep. Yeah. So that's chopping it up. Yeah, we chopped up cannabis a lot over here. Talked about city council. Like I said, I visited the State House Joint Commission on Cannabis Monday, and I testified real briefly. I told them what I thought they needed to hear. And there was a lot of reporters in there, but honestly, there should have been more people in that room advocating for cannabis. I expected to see that room packed. Um, I think our politicians have lost so much credibility on the issue of cannabis. They really have to do something to make the community trust that they have their interests in mind. Because all we've ever seen from politicians on the issue of cannabis, as far as cannabis consumers, all we've ever seen from them is them really seeking to criminalize us, delegitimize us, and then use us and never support us. So that's a concern, and we need to hold our politicians to what their job is. Their job is to support us and to stand up for us. Just because they don't like cannabis or they didn't learn about cannabis, or they don't consume cannabis, that's not a good enough reason for you to continue your bias. And the city of Boston has already been very open about their bias against the cannabis industry here, where that's very clear. So has Governor Baker's been very clear about his bias against the cannabis industry. And so we have to continue to think about all these issues, folks. And if we're trying to address racism, well, then we're going to have to talk about it. And the people who are coming to change these cannabis laws are not talking about it at all, right? Because they're not even really, they're not they're not on the same page. They're coming from this from a totally different angle, and they're not really thinking about advocating for consumers because they never did. It's the consumers that advocated for themselves when they made it legal. Politicians have never advocated for the consumers of cannabis, because first of all, they stood for a prohibitive distribution model which hurts consumers, right? That's what they've done. They've built a black market to send consumers to. So, they've done very little to help people, seek some type of reasonable policies around cannabis. They have to be dragged kicking and screaming to these issues. So they have yet to prove, that they can stand up for the very large cannabis consuming community. And they're going to have to get with it pretty quick because time's wasting here and we're trying to build a market. So, this is Chief from BostonCannabis.Info. I hope I wasn't too annoying. I can really go on and on about this stuff for days, folks, if you could believe that. It's Wednesday, March 22nd, 2017. I'm over here in the Studio 612 online studios, BostonCannabis.Info office. And we've just been chopping it up about cannabis. I'm gonna try to do this more often, at least once a week. Folks, you're free to call in. I got a cell phone on the side here. I'll just hit speakerphone. You can ask a question. You can give us a comment. Try not to cuss me out. I'll just hang up. But we're here to talk about cannabis as locals in a professional and responsible way, because we're here to build a new, efficient, and inclusive market that throws off the historic racism that has long been part of cannabis distribution in America and in the state of Massachusetts. We want to build an inclusive, safe model that's good for our communities. So that should be the goal. This is the Healing Our Relationship with Cannabis series with Chief from BostonCannabis.Info. I share cannabis information and news with people around me, people in the region, through the BostonCannabis.Info website. You can check it out, BostonCannabis.Info. You'll see some articles and stuff there. Go ahead and like it. Facebook and Twitter. I got someone at the door. Hold on a minute.
Oh, you put the recording?
Yeah, we're live. I've just been chopping it up. Just been chopping it up for about an hour. Boston Cannabis, the City Council, the State House, Equity in Cannabis. Yo, tell them who you are because you're gonna be with us.
Oh, we're live.
Yeah, mic right here. No, it's just a mic.
Okay.
It's just the mic right here and mic right here. This is Rockstone Triz. He's gonna be hosting with me some of these shows.
How's everybody doing this evening?
Yeah. So, once again, so I'm Chief, BostonCannabis.Info. We're trying to share information and knowledge about cannabis in the city of Boston and about the new coming market, and also information about spiritual cannabis. We're talking about that too. How cannabis is in the Bible, called cannabism, and all of that. So, folks, if you're interested in cannabis knowledge, and I encourage you to look up any of that stuff, you can call me here at the studio. You can call me at BostonCannabis.Info when we're off YouTube, and get your questions answered. I appreciate folks tuning in. Have a good one.